Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome to CG Reaction. This is every major US war crimes in 20 minutes. Allow in 20 minutes type of videos. Yeah, this is just an awesome type. I don't know who started this. I think there have been few Salmonella videos like this as well. So I don't know. I don't know if Salmonella made it famous or what. This is such an awesome, like, I've watched certain religious video on it as well, which is not like me. But yeah, those videos, like, I see people like that a lot. And this is just a month ago, and it has a 3.4 million views. This was on the Paint Explainer. I think I've watched videos from him. This is like Salmonella, probably. I don't know, something like that. It has a feeling of that. So I don't know. This is gonna be awesome because it's war crimes, it's military, and people in my channel love that shit. So let's watch this one. This video maintains a neutral stance. It reports history as publicly available for edutainment. Yeah, I guess that's the word. See the disclaimer in the pinned comment for more information. All the stories in the video originate from the United States. Okay, so this is like, don't get pissed off, people. So you heard it as well. Don't get pissed off at me. Even if I say something that you want to piss off. This disclaimer is applied to all my comments as well. There you go. Let's watch this one.
My Lai Massacre. On the 16th of March 1968, in the Vietnamese
He just starts. There is no intro. I love this.
village called Sun Mai, U.S. soldiers carried out what became the largest massacre of civilians by American forces in the 20th century. Between 347 and 504 unarmed villagers, most of them women, children, and the elderly, were killed. Many women and girls, some as young as 12, were raped before being murdered. Bodies were mutilated, homes were burned, and livestock was slaughtered.
Americans did this? Okay, I didn't even realize why this video is so famous, but now I realize it. You hear about this shit all the time, but you don't hear about Americans doing it. Well, obviously, that's going to be cases. So this video is going to be really interesting. Even I didn't thought of it, but now I see it. Because you're going to hear about things that you don't hear about ever. Because I guess Victor writes the history or something. The biggest media out there is America, and they usually don't talk about this. So this video is going to be really interesting.
Witnesses described women using their bodies to shield children, only for soldiers to fire into them. One ditch alone held more than 70 dead. Then, platoons went hut to hut, killing entire families, bayoneting the wounded, and throwing grenades. Soldiers later testified that their orders had been to destroy everything, leave nothing, and treat anyone still there as the enemy. One soldier intentionally shot himself in the foot to avoid taking part. A few, like Michael Bernhardt, refused to kill and later helped expose what happened. The massacre might have been even worse if not for Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson Jr. and his helicopter crew. Flying low over the village, they saw women and children being slaughtered, and at one point, Thompson landed between U.S. soldiers and terrified civilians, ordering his own gunners to fire on Americans if they kept killing. He personally evacuated survivors by helicopter, saving dozens.
See, I had hoped something like this would happen. I'm not the anti-America guy, as you already know, and I was hoping something like this would come. Why was that order even legal? America's a democracy in the end of the day, however you look at it. Shit like this can't fly. How was that even order given? Was the guy who gave the order court-martialed or worse? War crimes, this is not an American thing. Americans don't do this shit.
At first, the massacre was reported as a great victory, claiming that 128 Viet Cong were killed, and the unit was congratulated. Officers up the chain of command worked to hide the truth, but later on, when veterans like Ronald Reidenhauer spoke out and journalist Seymour Hersh investigated, the world learned the real story. When photographs surfaced showing women, children, and babies piled in ditches, what happened could no longer be denied. In the end, 26 soldiers were charged.
Look, man, I don't give a fuck. Look, if the threat is like, if you don't delete this small person, then the world would end in nuclear annihilation. Then world's gonna end in nuclear annihilation. I'm never doing that shit. How do you do that? How do you justify that? I can't even process when I'm sitting here. I don't care. Don't even write like you weren't there, you don't know, man. I don't give a fuck. How do you even do that? I don't. How are you even human when you do that? So all these people who like, fuck that, we are shooting at our own, but not letting this do this. That's commendable. Because whenever the stories like this have been written in the past, that hasn't happened. People just did fucked up things and move on. Very few has rose up to like actually defend the innocent, which actual people did, which is, that's the difference, right? When you talk about a democracy, that's the difference.
But only one, Lieutenant Calley, was convicted. He was found guilty of murdering 22 villagers and sentenced to life in prison, but he served 3.5 years under house arrest after President Nixon intervened. Medina, accused of giving the orders, was acquitted. Most others escaped punishment. Survivors, many of them children at the time, carried the trauma for decades. One recalled, "Everyone in my family was killed. They threw me into a ditch full of dead bodies. I was covered with blood and brains." Haditha Massacre. On the morning of
Jesus, that's that Far Cry 3 thing, right? In Far Cry 3, Vas kills you and throws you in a pit and you walk out. I'm pretty sure that's the scene I remember. The guy literally lived that. How many, these are just the story that knows, which means how many Americans have done this shit. Like even Nixon was involved. If he intervened and said like, oh, you're just going to get house arrest, and nobody was convicted, which means president was involved as well. Recent shit has been happening with Venezuela and things like, oh, they were like surrendering, no, and they still bomb it. How many war crimes happened that we don't even know about? See, this is why people like Putin and everybody just like say, okay, America should shut up and don't lecture me. When you muddy the water, this is what happens.
of November 19, 2005, in the Iraqi town of Haditha, a roadside bomb tore through a U.S. Marine convoy. The explosion killed a Marine instantly and left 2 other Marines badly wounded. Within hours, that turned into one of the darkest chapters of the Iraq War. The Marines shot 5 unarmed men who had been ordered out of their taxi, killing them on the spot. Then, they entered nearby houses. Inside were families with grandparents, parents, and children as young as 1 year old. Nonetheless, 19 civilians were killed in their homes, most shot at close range in the chest or head. By the end of the day, 25 unarmed civilians were dead, with the youngest victim being just 3 years old. The Marine Corps' first official story was false. They claimed that 15 civilians had been killed by the roadside bomb, and that 8 insurgents died in a firefight afterward. However, an Iraqi human rights worker filmed the aftermath: bullet holes in walls, bloodstains on floors, and bodies of women and children with gunshot wounds. A Time magazine reporter then began investigating and found that doctors at the local hospital confirmed that none of the bodies showed bomb injuries, but close-range gunshot wounds. A 9-year-old girl who survived said she saw her grandfather shot first in the chest and then in the head, followed by her grandmother. Investigations stretched on for years, and at first, 8 Marines were charged, but case after case collapsed. Some Marines received immunity in exchange for testimony, while others had their charges dropped. By 2008, nearly all charges were gone, and the only Marine punished was Vuteric.
See, man, fuck you. You cry bitch and moan when criminals do these things. You jail serial killers, but if you're a soldier, it's fine. You're the one who's invading the country. I don't care what the reasoning is. Americans are in Iraq, right? If you got bombed, that's war things. Fight it in a war way. You don't go inside the home of the people who live there, old people, and shoot them. And on top of that, there is no consequences. Your country protects you. Man, fuck you. I don't get this video is like barely in, and I'm getting pissed off now.
He admitted to negligent dereliction of duty, lost rank and pay, but avoided jail. For many Iraqis, this outcome was unbearable, as families who had lost multiple relatives in one morning saw 6 years of U.S. military prosecution end without a single Marine imprisoned. Survivors called it an assault on humanity. Lawyers for the victims urged international courts to take up the case. Meanwhile, the U.S. military paid $38,000 in compensation to some families. Samar Campaign.
See, this is why countries like China and Russia are saying like we need to break American monopoly or dollar monopoly. Whether they are right or wrong doesn't matter, but America's too powerful. And like even international court, what the fuck they're gonna do? America controls basically everything. And shit like this, like I didn't know any of this, man. I mean, I'm not some like like glazing eye guy who was oblivious or something. I knew something like this would exist, but not at this level. What the fuck?
Kill everyone over the age of 10. Those were the words of General Jacob H. Smith during the Philippine-American War in what became known as the Pacification of Samar. His order did not apply only to armed enemy fighters, but to everyone, as he wanted to turn the island into, in his own words, a howling wilderness. The situation leading up to this was already tense, as just months earlier, Filipino fighters together with local townspeople had carried out the Balangiga Massacre, where in a surprise attack, they killed 54 and wounded 18 U.S. soldiers. That's when the US government sent General Smith to Samar, who made it clear that he wanted no prisoners and asked for everyone capable of bearing arms to be killed. When Marines asked him what exactly capable of bearing arms meant, Smith explained that it meant boys as young as 10 years old. Waller himself, the major leading these Marines, partly resisted these instructions, telling some of his officers not to target women and children. Still, over just 11 days, he reported that his men burned 255 homes and killed 39 people. Civilians saw their towns and food reduced to ashes. The number of deaths will never be fully known, but broader estimates suggest around 2,000 to 2,500 civilians were killed. The campaign became infamous in the United States once reports reached home, and Smith was put on trial in May 1902, but not for murder or war crimes. Instead, he was found guilty only of conduct to the prejudice of good order and military discipline, a minor charge. His punishment was just a formal reprimand. To calm public anger, he was quietly forced into retirement. Waller himself was also later put on trial for ordering the execution of Filipino porters, but he was acquitted. Nisour Square Massacre. This one was different from the others. It happened without warning, and not by the regular US Army, but by a private contractor known as Blackwater, which made it even more controversial. On a normal morning in September 2007, a Blackwater convoy drove into Nisour Square in Baghdad to clear a route for US officials. Moments later, though, out of nowhere, they opened fire on Iraqi civilians. 17 people were killed, and 20 more were wounded. Some were shot while still sitting in their cars. For example, witnesses described one small Kia with a mother and her adult son inside. The son was shot in the head, and the car kept moving forward and was riddled with more bullets before a grenade set it on fire. Blackwater claimed the convoy had been ambushed and that the guards fired in self-defense, but the Iraqi government called it an unprovoked attack. The State Department admitted that innocent people had been killed, and Iraq suspended Blackwater's license to operate in its territory and demanded accountability. Several investigations began, and a US military report supported Iraq's version of events, saying Blackwater was at fault. The FBI concluded that at least 14 of the 17 people killed had been shot without justification. Some Blackwater guards themselves told investigators that the shooting was wrong. One guard even kept firing after others shouted for him to stop, until another contractor aimed his weapon at him to force him to stand down. The massacre raised questions about the role of private military contractors, and Iraq demanded
Man, there shouldn't be a private military anything. What is this Hollywood movie? The Russian thing, I forgot what was the name of that. The Russian thing, right, whose leader was killed. Now this Blackwater. Why do private military exist in the first place? That shouldn't be legal. Countries are sovereign, countries, governments, and they all keep each other in check. If American government and military does something, people are going to be pissed off at them. Private military shouldn't even be a thing. First of all, if private does anything, is government at fault here? Is American military at fault here? They can't just say, oh, we have nothing to do with it. You send them. I don't even know what to say. The private shit shouldn't exist. What is this, like contract, like construction or something? What do you mean private? This is serious thing. Why do America need private contractor? You have too much military. What are you going to do with it? You obviously trying to do something that you don't want your hands to get dirty.
punishment for Blackwater and pressed for compensation. In the U.S., the House passed a bill to bring contractors under U.S. criminal law in war zones, though the Senate did not vote on it. Then, the State Department told Blackwater its security contract would not be renewed, and years later, the case reached U.S. courts. In 2014, 4 Blackwater guards were convicted in federal court. One of them was sentenced to life in prison, while the others received 30 years each under firearms laws. There were some appeals, but in the end, the man originally sentenced to life was once again given life in prison, while the other 3 had their sentences reduced to about half of what they were before. Later on, however, there was a final twist. In December 2020, President Donald Trump pardoned all 4 men.
Why the fuck he had to do that? Okay, pro-Trump people, I know there are a few in my comments who always like, why the fuck would he do that? Don't even try to justify this shit. And you know what the worst thing is? If this was military, none of this would have even happened. Like, no prison, like we've already seen it in the start of the video. Nobody would get any prison time.
The decision triggered outrage in Iraq and harsh criticism from United Nations experts who said the pardons violated U.S. obligations under international law. Abu Ghraib. The photos from Abu Ghraib are widely known around the world for how disturbing they look, but the background is even darker. To the public, Abu Ghraib was a normal detention and interrogation facility, but it wasn't at all. Inside, there was sexual humiliation to lengths we can't go to for obvious reasons, torture, physical abuse, and rape. There was even the killing of Manadel al-Jamadi, whose body was packed in ice and later photographed with soldiers posing beside it. The shock was immediate and worldwide, so the Bush administration answered quickly, saying that these were isolated acts by a few rogue soldiers.
Let me guess, the Cuba thing, that facility. Look, man, whatever justification is, if you stoop so low to do this shit, even amongst the worst of the people, how different are you, regardless of the reasoning?
However, organizations like the Red Cross, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch said the opposite, claiming this was part of a larger pattern across U.S. prisons in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo. The Red Cross also reported that most Abu Ghraib detainees were civilians with no connection to armed groups. Then, internal documents showed how they were given approval for what were called
democratic rules says like no one should be screwed for anything. That's how democracy works. Democracy works as slow as the slowest person. If a law screws even one person, that law is wrong and like we have to remove it. Why does speed limit exist? 99% can drive at 100 miles per hour, but 1 or 2 would basically run over people, so you only have to drive at 40 miles per hour. But if it's not one of your civilians, fuck him, right? So what if few civilians get screwed and gets this heinous act? Just label them terrorists and torture them. Is anything gonna happen? No, because America's too powerful.
Enhanced interrogation techniques. These documents would be later known as the torture memos, for reasons you can imagine. They argued that the Geneva Conventions didn't apply overseas and didn't classify the detainees as prisoners of war, which allowed them to hold people longer without charges and deny them the rights normally given to prisoners of war. Other orders showed Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez authorizing the use of dogs, extreme heat and cold, reversed sleep cycles, and sensory deprivation. Inside the cells, prisoners were stripped naked and forced into humiliating poses, threatened with dogs, beaten, shackled in painful positions, deprived of sleep and warmth, and forced into sexual acts. Taguba recorded one prisoner sodomized with a chemical light. Detainees spoke of acid poured on their skin, being dragged by ropes tied to their genitals, and being mocked. Manadel al-Jamadi, whose death was ruled a homicide, never led to any criminal charges. At the same time, 36 detainees died in insurgent mortar attacks on the prison, which critics said violated the Geneva rule that prisoners should not be kept in active combat zones. In 2006,
Americans are doing this shit. Imagine what is happening in North Korea. Old Chinese communist time, right? At Duns Cap time. Not today, maybe today, who knows, but back then. So old Soviet Union, early Soviet Union. God. If this shit is happening with America, a democratic country, who like laws and things are written clearly, but there is a real element of war crime, so people should be afraid of that, and they still do it. Where there are no laws like that, where people like state in front of anything, fuck everyone else, screw personal liberty, communistic countries and fascist countries, Nazi Germany, North Korea, like I said. What type of things are happening there? My brain just like, it just hurts trying to think about it. I don't want to think about it. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know why I started to react to this video right now. I wanted to react to something fun and good, and like, I didn't want to, like turn this day bad. Like I was having a good day. I don't know why I decided to react to this one. I'm genuinely gonna be scarred after this video. I'm not the type of guy who just consume the information and walk away. This will haunt me the whole day.
the Supreme Court ruled that the Geneva Conventions did apply, and 17 soldiers and officers were removed, while 11 were court-martialed. The punishments varied. One guy got 10 years, some 3, and others shorter sentences, or even just reprimands or demotions. External contractors, such as the company CACI Premier Technology, also came under scrutiny. Pretty recently, in 2024, a jury found them liable for conspiring with military police to soften up prisoners through abuse, awarding 3 former detainees $42 million in damages. Jurors concluded that CACI interrogators facilitated mistreatment even if they did not personally carry it out. Operation Speedy Express. This was one of the most brutal and controversial U.S. campaigns of the Vietnam War. You can get an idea of what really happened when you hear that the Army reported about 11,000 enemy killed, but recovered only 750 weapons from the dead. Operation Speedy Express, carried out from December 1968 to May 1969, and run under Major General Julian Ewell, had the official goal of destroying Viet Cong bases, cutting supply lines, and re-establishing U.S. control over a region considered a stronghold of the Viet Cong, the Mekong Delta. On paper, The operation looked like an overwhelming success, considering that just 242 American soldiers died, while the enemy lost 11,000. With a ratio of 45-1, it looked like a decisive victory, but the numbers hid something darker. The fact that only about 750 weapons were recovered means that thousands of those killed were probably unarmed civilians. The Army's own Inspector General later estimated that between 5,000 and 7,000 civilians were killed during the operation. The campaign relied on overwhelming firepower, like helicopter gunships, artillery barrages, and fighter bomber strikes, in a heavily crowded region with civilians. This basically turned entire areas into free fire zones. David Hackworth, a highly decorated battalion commander, admitted,
First Iraq, this Vietnam, why you invaded these countries, whatever your reasoning is, and this should happen. If back and forth was happening, like, okay, let's just say you killed people like because somebody invaded you, and that makes sense. The US's thing is so fucked up because every single instance is you decided to invade this country because of Soviet Union communism was rising, what the fuck your justification is, or because like, oh, weapons of mass destruction, Iraq or whatever. Man, fuck you.
openly, a lot of innocent Vietnamese civilians got slaughtered because of the Yule Hunt drive to have the highest body count in the land. Survivors and witnesses described whole villages wiped out, with civilians getting shot from the air as they tried to run. A Viet Cong commander later explained, "Most of the people killed were civilians, because civilians would run. We soldiers held our positions." Reports of atrocities began to surface in 1969, but they were overshadowed by the My Lai Massacre, which we've just talked about. In 1972, Newsweek published an investigation by Kevin Buckley and Alexander Shimkin called Pacification's Deadly Price. They had interviewed villagers and studied hospital records. In one provincial hospital, they found that 3/4 of the civilian wounds treated came from US firepower, not Viet Cong attacks. Their conclusion was that thousands of civilians had been killed during Speedy Express. No Gun Ri Massacre. In the summer of 1950, during the Korean War, one of its darkest tragedies took place at a railway bridge near the village of No Gun Ri. US commanders were afraid that North Korean soldiers were disguising themselves as civilians, so they ordered refugee movements to be blocked. Declassified documents later showed that some commands actually went even further, authorizing troops to fire on groups of civilians who approached. Then, disaster struck. As waves of refugees fled south from the advancing North Korean army, they reached US lines. There, they were stopped, searched, and grouped near the railway tracks by No Gun Ri. American planes then shot at them. Survivors say ground troops soon opened fire too, driving them into the culverts and pinning them down in the bridge underpass.
Okay, seriously, so what is your justification for this? Gung-ho military people are the worst. Fuck you, man. This is the problem. When people say like these are people, like there's always that like right-wing Asmon crowd type of people who just like, completely defend and say, oh, this is like left-wing crying, explain this shit. This is real thing. Trump also like pardoning those people. Yeah, Trump is probably okaying all this shit right now. If Venezuela gets under invasion, all this shit will happen. I'm just sure of it. The fuck, man? I did not expect this from like America. I get it, like I didn't have like rosy eye thing. Like I know fucked up things happen, but not at this scale.
Hundreds of South Korean refugees, mostly women, children, and the elderly, were caught under fire, and for 3 days, families screamed as they piled bodies on top of one another for cover, drank from a stream turned red with blood, and watched children die beside them. The death toll has long been debated, with survivors speaking of about 400 people killed, and US veterans giving numbers ranging from dozens to several hundred. A South Korean government inquiry was able to confirm 163 people dead or missing by name, along with 55 wounded, and concluded that the real toll was likely much higher, around 250 to 300. Nearly half of the confirmed victims were children. For decades, the story was silenced, as survivors lived in fear under South Korea's authoritarian governments. It was not until 1999 that the Associated Press exposed the story worldwide, interviewing survivors and US veterans. The reporting won a Pulitzer Prize and forced both the US and South Korean governments to investigate. The US Army's 2001 report admitted that civilians had been killed by American air and ground fire, but claimed there had been no orders to deliberately massacre them. It described the killings as a tragic accident of war. President Bill Clinton expressed deep regret and admitted things happened which were wrong. Instead of compensation, the US funded a memorial.
I'm sorry. The South Park skit. We killed you. We heinously killed you using our fucking A10 Warthogs. I'm sorry. You want to murder people most horrifically, join the military. We were doing just our jobs and our government won't do anything. No justice will be served because technically we were American military and we can do anything with the fuck we want. The message here is if you are in American military and you have decent power, like sergeant or whatever, like person who gives lieutenant or whatever, do anything you want. Like your country will save you. Go away, do anything.
And scholarships, which survivors rejected. South Korean investigators, however, concluded that there had almost certainly been orders to fire, pointing to missing records, consistent testimony, and orders from the time to treat refugees as enemy agents. Later, more declassified documents strengthened the case. One was a letter dated July 26, 1950, from the U.S. ambassador in Seoul, reporting that the U.S. military had adopted a policy of shooting refugee groups approaching its lines. This and other incriminating records had been deliberately left out of the Army's official report. No Gun Ri also set off wider investigations in South Korea, uncovering more than 200 other cases of alleged U.S. killings of civilians in the early years of the war, including refugee bombings and mass executions. Sand Creek Massacre.
For what? Why did you... Who gives a fuck? Why did you investigate? Military is not going to do anything. People will forget and move on. American civilians, like, they're too happy making money and just like eating McDonald's. They don't give a fuck. Nobody's going to care. Investigate it for what?
November 29, 1864, troops under Colonel John Chivington rode toward a Native American camp of the Cheyenne and Arapaho people. Chief Black Kettle had moved his people there after being told it was safe, and he raised a U.S. flag with a white flag underneath it to show peace. Many of the warriors were away, and most of the people in camp were too old or too young to fight. Despite this, Chivington's soldiers attacked. Witnesses later described women and children being shot at close range, people cut apart with knives, babies killed, and bodies mutilated for trophies. One account told of a child wandering in the sand while soldiers took turns trying to shoot him. Another described fingers and ears cut off for jewelry and the body of Chief White Antelope butchered. By the time the killing ended, most of the dead were women and children. Chivington claimed that 500 to 600 warriors were killed, boasting about the number, but other sources said the real number was closer to 150, with about 2/3 women and children. The soldiers suffered far fewer losses. Before leaving, they looted the lodges and returned to kill some of the wounded. The reason why this massacre happened in the first place is even sadder. In the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty, the U.S. recognized a large Cheyenne and Arapaho homeland. But after the Colorado Gold Rush and new migration, they asked the natives for more land than was agreed, and a small group of chiefs signed the Fort Wise Treaty, ceding most of the land to appease the U.S. Many Cheyenne, though, rejected it as invalid, and tensions rose. The governor told friendly Indians to gather near forts in order to stay safe, and Colonel Chivington himself, while he declared openly that he had come to kill Indians, told those seeking peace to come under military protection at Fort Lyon. That's exactly what Black Kettle did, following his instructions, but his people were pushed out. He still believed the U.S. and white flags would protect them, but the massacre happened. In Colorado and Washington, the story was first reported as a victory, but the truth quickly surfaced. 3 investigations followed, including a congressional inquiry that called it a foul and dastardly massacre. Officers and scouts testified about the killings and mutilations. Captain Soule, who had refused to fire, gave evidence and was murdered shortly after in Denver. Despite the findings, no one was court-martialed. Chivington had already resigned.
Why bother? Why even like bother going to court? Who gives a fuck, right? Like, doesn't matter. It's just all ceremonial. Nobody gives a fuck.
While his career ended in disgrace, he avoided legal punishment. A later treaty at the Little Arkansas promised survivors land access and reparations, but those promises were soon broken and replaced with much smaller reservations. Philippines concentration camps. During the Philippine-American War...
I need to take a pause. I can't just continue this. All right, let's continue.
Concentration camps were used in Batangas, and one American officer described them as some suburb of hell. You'll soon understand why. Back then, General James Franklin Bell took command of U.S. forces in that area, and his goal was to starve the rebels and cut them off from any support. However, since there were many civilians there, they decided to put them into heavily guarded camps, as their homes, fields, and animals were destroyed. All civilians were required to carry identification papers, and anyone found outside the camps without them could be shot on the spot. Bell himself said neutrality should not be tolerated, which meant that everyone was either an enemy or a friend, and anyone accused of helping the rebels risked execution. Conditions inside the camps were catastrophic. People were packed together in crowded spaces with poor sanitation, which made diseases spread quickly. Cholera, smallpox, beriberi, and even bubonic plague killed thousands. Food was also scarce, and some soldiers described groups of men being forced to dig their own graves before being executed, with the excuse that keeping them alive would take food away from US troops. Torture was also performed,
Really?
such as waterboarding. The death toll was incredible. Between January and April 9th,
I'm gonna have these people executed for no other reason than like them being alive would take food away. Let them fucking go, right? Open the walls and let them go.
1902, 8,350 people died in the camps. In some camps, as many as 1 out of every 5 prisoners died. To calm public anger in the United States, the Army's top public relations officer tried to defend the camps. He claimed they were meant to protect friendly natives, feed them, and teach them better hygiene. However, this claim collapsed when reports from inside the camps surfaced, with letters from soldiers and witnesses. Wounded Knee Massacre. Before sunrise,
Yeah, this is bullshit, man. Yeah, the recent thing with the migrants' children Americans took away. They were saying, oh, they're taking, like, people literally took the photos of what conditions these children were put in, and your own American government said we can't really track the parents. So if these children are taken away from the parents, yeah, that's it. We won't know who the parent is, and these are babies and small kids. You shown this, like this cage type thing where kids are put. And you're like, oh, this is just camps where the children are kept safely. After all this, I believe all that shit. Where kids are just put in worse condition and nobody gives a fuck. I know that most times, most soldiers and most military things are not like this. But any is too much and this is too many already.
at Wounded Knee Creek, cavalry surrounded the Native American band of Lakota and began collecting their guns. Tension grew as soldiers searched the people, and a deaf Lakota man named Black Coyote held onto his rifle, and during a struggle, it went off. In that instant, soldiers opened fire on the entire camp, even though most Lakota men had already been disarmed. The Army's Hotchkiss guns fired into the tents where women and children were hiding. In less than an hour, more than 250 Lakota were killed or fatally wounded. 25 U.S. soldiers were also killed. Survivors tried to flee, but they were chased and shot, and some soldiers finished off the wounded where they lay. A blizzard followed the massacre, and 3 days later, civilians gathered the frozen bodies and placed them in a mass grave. 4 infants were found alive, still wrapped in their mothers' shawls. The Army removed Colonel Forsyth, who had led the operation, but later reinstated him. An inquiry criticized his tactics, but did not blame him. 19 Medals of Honor were then awarded for Wounded Knee. Native leaders and many others have condemned those awards for decades, but most recently, in 2025, the Defense Secretary announced the medals would not be revoked. If you want to discuss this video or suggest an idea for the next one,
I started this video with being like, okay, let's watch this one. Minutes in, I'm like, oh fuck, why did I watch this video? Yeah, I don't know, man. This is just fucked up. Like, too many instances of fucked up thing happening, even recently as Iraq War, which was not that long ago considering all this. Yeah. So every time people criticize America, like, okay, let's not try to be all rosy about what America does. They are not really wrong, is it? Yeah, so even in countries where like, oh, this is democracy, there are like war crimes here, don't do that shit, there's no fascism. People still do that shit, and your country actually backs them. So you're just pretending at that time. If you're not going to carry out justice, you're basically no different than North Korea at that time. At least they're not lying. They're deliberately doing on your face. You'll just like tiptoe around and still like nobody's going to be found guilty. In the end, fuck you, that's what it is. People getting pissed off, like cops have that mentality. Cops protect their own. US military is 10 times as worse. You're the one who invaded all these countries. That makes it even more worse. Not because they were threatening America, because whatever your doctrine was, oh, communism, we can't have that shit. Oh, weapons of mass destruction, yeah, sure, why not? Alright, I'll see you next time.